All right, guys, so I just wanted to show you real quick this piece from my collection. Pretty interesting gun, if not a terribly sort of impressive piece. This is my Austro-Hungarian, I should say, Mannlicher 1895, produced for the Austro-Hungarian Army before or during World War One. A little hard to tell which, they don't tend to date those. But we know this gun has, at minimum, seen use by 3 different countries. In fact, we know that it's seen use with probably at least 4. I can name 3 of those. The first, obviously, being the Austro-Hungarians who created the rifle. And this is, in fact, a carbine. So this is the short version that is, in fact, designed to be the short version. All right. Versus what happens after the war is they take a lot of the long rifles, they cut those down because the treaty that they sign basically says they cannot have the long versions of the rifles. The short rifles are sometimes considered more police weapons than military weapons. So that is what they do. They cut these down, they keep them, and this is, by this point, no longer Austria-Hungary. This is Austria, Hungary, and the multiple other successor states when that empire falls apart in 1918, just before the armistice. So once that war ends, this carbine goes from Austria-Hungary to one of those successor states. I am not sure which. It does not seem to have stayed there very long. None of the successor states, they got these as reparations. None of them particularly liked them for a couple of different reasons, a lot of which having to do with ammunition, and there were better options available fairly cheaply after the war because all these countries had massive militaries that basically immediately got cut way down. So some of these end up getting sold off to other even poorer countries, one of which being Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a fairly interesting nation as it is one of only 2 nations in Africa that was not colonized by a European power in the rush for, or what is often called the rape of Africa. Partly because they adopted firearms technology at a fairly early date, and by the time any powers tried seriously to colonize Ethiopia, they had a very large stockpile of either modern or nearly modern European arms. It didn't hurt that the nation that tried its hardest to colonize Ethiopia was the Italian Empire, which was freshly unified under Garibaldi and trying to find legitimacy sort of in the Western world by creating its own empire, which all the other Western states had for a while, especially Britain, France, the Netherlands. Germany, to a lesser extent, was having more success than Italy was in establishing it, which they had only also just unified a few decades before this. So Ethiopia will defeat Italy in the field at places like Adwa, and that sort of stops any nations from trying to colonize Ethiopia. They're sort of using, the other colonial powers are sort of using Ethiopia as a buffer state between them and the other colonial powers in Africa. And after World War One, Ethiopia will start buying more guns, trying to upgrade those stockpiles it has to stuff that is obsolete by European standards, but far above what they currently have in inventory. That may be what happens to this gun. Whichever successor state takes it will hand it over to Ethiopia. That or this was one of the guns given to Italy as reparations when Austria-Hungary fell. Because one thing that proves where this gun has been is on the buttstock here. We have this rather beat up cartouche that says AOI. That would have been stamped there in the 1930s when Italy tried to go back into Ethiopia and do what it had failed to do at Adwa, which was to colonize Ethiopia and sort of rebuild, in Mussolini's somewhat addled mind, the Roman Empire. So he is trying to build a Mediterranean empire for Italy, sort of aggrandize themselves. And in Ethiopia, they're really just trying to sort of undo what he perceived as a humiliation. So this gun by the 1930s is some way, shape, or form in Ethiopia and is in use by the Italian East African Army, which is what those letters stand for in Italian, AOI. I'm not gonna try to pronounce that in Italian, but they will take these guns they have there that are being used by this army that is sort of second line, not using mainland Italian arms, secondary standard kind of things, and this will be marked and in use by the Italian East Africans. Now, obviously, Italy will lose World War II. Ethiopia will regain its independence, and this will go back into Ethiopian stores where it seems to have probably been put away without a lot of attempt at preservation. So it is in very rough shape. And if you are wondering, this looks like a Royal Tiger Imports rifle. It is. RTI bought most of Italy's obsolete stockpiles and brought them over into the United States for import. These have sort of a mixed reputation in the collector world. And I would certainly say if you're trying to find something to shoot, do not buy an RTI import from Ethiopia. They did not store these particularly well, and many of them were used quite heavily before they even went into storage. So they're in some pretty rough shape. However, if you want an interesting piece of history, all right, buying one of the guns that comes out of Ethiopia is not a bad idea. They've been there, they've done that, and they certainly show that fact. So just to keep in mind, if something is good for your collection or not really depends on why you are collecting. All right, have a good day.